Welcome to the Expert Series, where we explore the cutting-edge issues shaping national security and defense. It's Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. I'm Josh Malm, Director of Research and Analysis for the CDAI Institute. In Part 2 of this two-part podcast series, we explore Canada's submarine fleet renewal. In Part 1, our experts Mark Norman, Bob Davidson, and Luc Cassivi discuss the geopolitical and strategic imperatives driving this initiative, historical context, and naval strategy. In Part 2, today, we'll discuss procurement challenges, the complexities involved in acquiring the new fleet, and the associated issues of recruitment and retention in the Navy. We'll also cover design considerations and the technological and capability requirements essential for meeting Canada's future defense needs. This is the Expert Series. To kick off today's discussion, we spoke with Bob Davidson, who spoke about Canada's need for stealthy and self-defensive submarines, the importance of partnering with NATO allies for our resources and training, and the technological challenges of building and maintaining submarines domestically. Davidson sits on the CDAI Institute's Board of Directors. His submarine seagoing appointments include 3 years on exchange with the Royal Navy and 18 months commanding the sea training group for the Australian Submarine Squadron. So Bob, how might the changing nature of undersea warfare, including advancement in unmanned systems and anti-submarine technologies, influence the design and capabilities of the new submarines we need?
You need a submarine to be quite stealthy because you want to minimize the likelihood that it's going to be attacked. But if it is attacked, you also want a platform that has some ability to defend itself. So be that with soft kill measures against incoming torpedoes, or be it hard kill measures. You know, there's a capability out there being developed for an anti-torpedo torpedo, and that kind of capability, I think, would be a critical capability going forward to improve the survivability of the submarine itself. More broadly, you talked about platforms that are out there. One of the things that I think we want to look at, I already mentioned an orphan class in the Victoria. When we had the Oberons, we were in a family of nations that operated the Oberons, and so, you know, when there were shortages of parts or indeed when we needed to do some tactical development to improve the way that we could use the platform against various threats, we had lots of help from our allies. We could work with allies in order to develop the countermeasures that would be needed, or the standard tactics and procedures that we would apply if a threat arose. And so there's a lot of power to getting back into that kind of a strategic arrangement if we can, particularly if we can do that, I think, with NATO allies, because then we can do it within the umbrella of NATO security. We can have supply chains where we're using NATO stock numbers, and so when we all speak the same language, it becomes a whole lot easier to manage some of those issues. So I think manufacturers that can provide a submarine that will create those kinds of options for strategic partnerships, sharing things like tactical development. We have to produce commanding officers, for example. We've always done that in conjunction with some of our allies, because it's expensive to create submarine commanding officers. It's a very unique and difficult skill set to acquire. Not everybody can do it. And so, you often test people and they don't succeed. So that's one of the reasons why it becomes costly. So if you can do it with allies, you can help to reduce those costs collectively. You can also share training. You can share training simulators and the development of those training simulators. Any tactical development that's been done in somebody else's training simulator can be shared. All of those things tend towards economies of effort that you only get if you're doing it with strategic partners. And so I think that's one of the key aspects that the government will need to consider, the Navy will need to consider as they look for a replacement platform.
What are some of the challenges inherent in the acquisition or procurement process for submarines? Perhaps you could touch on some of the difficulties involved with building domestically and maintenance.
One of the things you have to remember when you're building a submarine is circularity is critically important. It's the round nature of a submarine hull in cross section that gives it its strength to operate at depth. And rolling steel, high quality steel, to achieve those kinds of circularities is a skill set that we don't have in Canada. On top of that, you need to be able to weld all of those different sections together with a high quality weld that can withstand outside pressures. In many respects, a submarine is much more complicated than a rocket or a space shuttle, because, you're trying to keep, not only are you trying to keep the air in, but you got to keep the water out. And so that's going to complicate your process. So coming back to the manufacture of a submarine, there are a lot of unique and special skill sets associated with it, which we don't have currently in Canada. So we don't have the capacity to build it in Canada at the moment. We need to buy off the shelf, but we also need to develop the capability to do running repairs, to maintain the submarine as it goes forward. And so we're going to have, even if it's an overseas original equipment manufacturer, we're going to need a domestic capability created appropriately to carry on. And we have done a lot of that with the Victoria class, but and a lot of that has been done in-house through our fleet maintenance facilities. But, we need to be able to maintain and develop and grow our sustainment capability for any submarine platform that we get. So that will require a lot of negotiations and partnerships with an OEM and domestic yards in order to create that. And when you think about it, in the overall, when the Parliamentary Budget Office finally calculates how much all of this is going to cost, and they put all of the costs together, and we look at that number, and it will probably be eye-watering to most people. When you look at that number, the largest portion of it is going to be, salaries and ongoing maintenance. It's not going to be the original production of the submarine. So the vast majority of that work is going to take place in Canada anyway. That money will be spent in Canada in terms of ongoing maintenance and sustainment, in terms of the salaries and training for all the personnel. And so we can expect that the vast majority of the money, no matter what, will be spent in Canada, even if we are having the submarine manufactured overseas. For those working on the file, I would say get going, and we need to get going fast. The government needs to understand that, time is already running short. Transition has to be planned. The key aspect, the long pole in the tent, is people and training of those people. And we're already experiencing a recruiting and retention challenge in the Navy at the moment. So, the right signals that come out of moving forward with modern capabilities are what attracts people to that kind of a community. And so we've got to absolutely get going now in order to move forward. So the sooner the better, I would say, is the key message I would say to anybody going forward. And then, don't let, for those that are naysayers out there, for the naysayers, don't let our experience with the Victoria class and the challenges we've had there be the deciding factor on how you move forward. The Navy can indeed recruit to a new submarine capability if the crews are small, and they should be, maybe under 30 people per crew. It's not an insurmountable challenge to get the capability going, but you've got to send the right signals and you got to spend the money. And then the final thing I would say is, when that number comes out and people start talking about how much it costs, we have to remember that when these things are calculated by the Parliamentary Budget Office and others, they tend to do these overall costs that include the salaries, the sustainment, and the original purchase price. But all of these costs, and so you need to bear that in mind, and you need to remember that you're amortizing that cost over the whole life of the platform. And if you do that, and you look at what that number is when you're spreading it out over, 30 plus year lifetime span of the platform, you realize then that going forward in a forecast defense budget, it's a portion of that, and it is manageable, provided we can get ourselves to 2% GDP. It would not be a problem.
We also spoke with Luc Cassivi to discuss submarine procurement, the need for advanced stealth technology and sensors, the importance of domestic maintenance and support capabilities, and the current limitations in Canadian shipbuilding. Rear Admiral Luc Cassivi joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1983, following a career in the Royal Canadian Sea Cadets. His senior roles include Commander of Military Personnel Generation and Canadian Defence Academy, CAF Senior Liaison Officer to Veteran Affairs Canada, and Director General of Culture Change at CPCC. He also served in Australia, the UK, the Netherlands, and the US. Luc, I recently read an op-ed in the Hill Times discussing Canada's submarine acquisition, and it seemed to express surprise at the need for Canada to consider foreign-built submarines. The article suggested a debate over whether Canada should purchase submarines from abroad or focus on domestic production. This kind of debate doesn't seem to occur as frequently with other types of military acquisitions, such as jets, for instance. Could you maybe clarify why discussions about submarine procurement in Canada might be framed differently compared to other defense acquisitions?
Well, I think your question is appropriate, and for an outside observer, that's how you would see things. It makes complete sense. So why do we have these discussions about submarines, but not always about other things? I mean, aircrafts are different. I think when you look at aircraft procurement, we are really, I want to say quick, but that's not necessarily the word. But we have great avenues available through alternate acquisition means, like foreign military sales, for example, with the U.S. and other mechanism with our allies, to leverage large production machinery, large projects, and reduce risk both to schedule and to costs that's associated with being part of those large multinational enterprise. It's good for industry too. They get to participate, and we get to develop some great technology that goes with that. So when you look at the F-35, the P-8, I mean, those are all pieces that make it great, and you take away the risk of some of the more developmental options that would exist elsewhere. And when you're in crunch, you have a crunch for time, and you're trying to deal with capability gap management like that, those processes make complete sense. Canada started investing decades ago on the national shipbuilding strategy. In its infancy, it saw what happened in the last fleet renewal, so both the update to the Iroquois class, getting the Halifax class into service, building them, all of that. And they say, we need to do better. We need to do better for a number of reasons. Too many of these recapitalization projects were synchronized into always all happening at the same time, and put a lot of stress on the public purse to make that happen. So the desire was to desynchronize and build resilient Canadian industry that can satisfy the need both of building and sustaining those capabilities in long term. And maybe, if that went well, they could export. So the national shipbuilding strategy was to build that sovereign capability to build to our needs when it comes to ships. And it was very clear at that point to put ships in. The technology capability needs for submarines is much higher and much more unique, and that would be try to run before we can walk, so to speak. So let's focus on ships, and that's where we are with the joint support ship with the Canadian Surface Combatant modernization, AOPS, and because it took a while to get ourselves going, to get the yards ready, to get the project to maturity for the warfighting capability. We're still kind of in a period where Although all those things are going to happen, there's, their AOPS is almost done. GSS is moving along. CSC will, activities are started, but the deliveries are later, and now we're in a crunch for that. Submarines, there was a time when I was young and went to university, so a little longer than you, where, I remember visiting MIL Vickers in Montreal, and they were building they were turning the steel for the last hull sections of the LA class submarines that they were building in there. They were building the torpedo tube for the LA class, but also for the Walrus class submarine that were being built at the time in the for the Netherlands. So there was a time where we were doing some of that stuff, but that got divested. And rebuilding that capacity was beyond what we could probably reasonably expect to be able to do in Canada at the time. So that's why there's much more focus on buying overseas when it comes to submarines. Where I think there's space for discussion is where do you locate yourself in building the level of capacity you need internally to the country to sustain the submarine capability in the long term from an in-service support when you build the submarine overseas. And I think that's where it's not the only issue, but it's one of the challenges we had with the Victoria class. When we took it, it didn't help that it was atrophied supply chain for spare parts and things of that nature. We had to rebuild those from scratch. But starting off with building technical expertise that understands the platform and that can, with a certain level of maturity, participate in the in-service support of the platform, that'll be the challenge. But yeah, so that's why we're looking overseas. There's, there's only so much we can do based on the shipbuilding capacity that there is in Canada.
In the recent press release regarding the acquisition of the 12 submarines we've been discussing, terms like stealth, lethality, persistence, and Arctic deployability were highlighted. For those who may not be familiar with these terms, could you explain what types of technologies or capabilities are necessary to meet these criteria? I understand that specifics may evolve as the project progresses, but a general overview would be appreciated.
So, I'm not going to get ahead of the project team. Like the Navy will promulgate as they go through the piece what their requirements are as it relates to this technology. But, stealth is really, you're looking at acoustics and like the noise the submarine makes, how silent it is, how that happens is really modern technology when it comes to acoustic tiling, to mounting the equipment, reducing the amount of noisy equipment you have on board, so that noise doesn't transmit through the hull and makes it harder to passively or actively detect the submarine. So hull shape, the material you use, how it reacts is one significant way for the stealth element of that. Lethality comes with two things: sensors and weapons, right? So the sensors and I would add communication. So to be able to know what is happening around you, or for someone to be able to tell you what's happening a little further out, or for you to tell them what's happening to you that requires action. So building what we call the common operating picture with the folks you operate with, or just for yourself. So those sensors and that way to communicate in a modern way, satellite, digital, great bandwidth for graphics, images, whatever else, become important. And then the capability to do something about it. So that comes with, your weapons. So the torpedo, anti-submarine, anti-ship torpedo, strike capabilities. So either, for land strikes, so, Tomahawk-like type missile technology. And then others that may come with time, maybe an anti-air missile capability. So, the one thing a diesel electric submariner doesn't like are maritime helicopters, particularly dipping helicopters. So the ability to deal with that would be quite fantastic. And then it comes into the reality of what people often refer to the less sexy elements, but it's your propulsion. So what type of propulsion you're using. Air independent propulsion permits you to reduce significantly your noise level, permits high endurance, permits you to operate near or under the ice for a certain amount of time. If you're going to be persistent, then the crew needs to be comfortable. They need to carry enough food, enough fuel to be able to stay on station for a long period of time and be able to operate in a sane way. So adequate crew comfort in all of these pieces become important. What we call habitability. And the ability to make a difference. So you need to be able to integrate with your allies, with the fleet that's out there, that's working with you, so that you can contribute to the mission success. So there's a lot of independent operations when you're a submarine. There's a lot of it's part of that stealth element to a certain extent, but you need to contribute to the greater good. So being able to integrate with your allies, that'd be communications being one, but other elements that'd be access to intelligence and things of that nature are important. Right? So I would say that those, from a layman's perspective, so that's what it means. So there's a lot of really good advanced technology. That means high technical jobs, really interesting technology when it comes to advanced diesel, really quiet quiet technologies. So it's quite challenging, and it's quite fun for the industry to tackle those challenges.
To close out today's episode, we also spoke with Mark Norman, who discussed the recruitment process for submariners, specific requirements for Canadian submarines, such as operating in the Arctic, and other design considerations. A 39-year veteran of uniformed service to Canada, Mark Norman retired from the Royal Canadian Navy in the rank of Vice Admiral in 2019. Vice Admiral Norman rose through the ranks to be Vice Chief of Defence Staff, the second highest appointments in the Canadian Armed Forces. Mark, in the first part of this installment on sub replacements, you mentioned recruitment and retention issues. Now, are there specific challenges related to recruitment and retaining submarine personnel, or are these issues consistent with the broader recruitment and retention problems faced by the CAF more generally?
In essence, the submarine community is as much a victim of the broader socio-demographic issues that are plaguing the Canadian Forces writ large with respect to recruiting, but there are some very specialized issues that are making it even more difficult. So let's start with typically submariners are recruited from inside the active Navy already. Okay, so you may want to join the Armed Forces to become a submariner, but you don't sign up at the recruiting center to become a submariner. You sign up to become one of the naval trades that eventually is employed in the submarine. So you get your basic qualifications, and then you're screened and recruited and screened into the submarine service. And there's a series of physical and psychological tests that go, and aptitude tests that are required for that. And then you start submarine training, which is very specialized training. It takes several months, and and there's an academic component to it, and there's a practical component to it, and eventually you're qualified as a submariner. You are still inside the broader fleet organization with a specialty for submarine service, but we try as much as possible to protect those who wear the dolphins, which is the visible designator, the badge of two horizontally opposed dolphins with a maple leaf between them that identifies people as being qualified submariners. Eventually, they will progress in their careers where they either rank out or they become too senior in their respective trades, occupations, or whatever, that they can't serve in submarines anymore. but for the most part, we try and optimize their availability for probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, I guess, of operational window. So part of the problem, so first of all, you have to already be in. And so you're recruiting from an already restricted gene pool. The second problem is currently an optics problem or a perception problem. It's hard. There is an underlying desire. There's a lot of people who want to be submariners, and that's really exciting and cool. And it's a very specialized branch, and there's a lot of really good reasons why you would want to be a submariner. The problem is right now they don't have the capacity to generate submariners, so it's kind of there's kind of this unfortunate scenario where people could be highly motivated to do it, but they're going to go and they may or may not get a chance to actually use their new skills because the submarines are not available, or they're sitting around waiting for training or whatever. And typically the people who are going to go into submarines are some of the more adventurous and ambitious people in the fleet. So there are some people who, don't necessarily want to go to sea when the ship has to go to sea. They're not going to be the ones that are going to sign up to be submariners. They're going to want to actually go and do the business. So there's sort of unfortunately, like a negative self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will.
Could you discuss the key capabilities and design considerations that you think could be incorporated into the new submarine fleet? And specifically, how might the Royal Canadian Navy's requirements for covert operations, maritime deterrence, control of maritime approaches, and power projection influence the design of this new fleet?
The first thing you have to consider is where do these submarines need to operate? Because that starts to define some of the physical characteristics of the submarine. How big is it? How fast can it go? How long can it operate, either submerged, or how often does it need to charge its batteries? So let's explain again to your listeners. Really, in the simplest terms possible, there are two broad types of submarines: conventionally powered submarines and nuclear propelled submarines. Nuclear propelled submarines tend to be larger. They use nuclear reactors to basically turn water into steam. The steam then turns turbines, which then moves the submarine through the water at significant speed, like really fast. And they can cover vast distances, and they can stay underwater for, the duration of their crew or their food. So those are some of the advantages. And nuclear powered submarines are typically characterized as weapons of maneuver. So they have the advantages of speed and distance and endurance. Okay. Conventionally powered submarines typically are powered by what I would describe as kind of a hybrid, like a Toyota Prius. They have an internal combustion engine that turns some electric motors that generate electricity, and those electric motors charge batteries, and then the batteries are used to send power to a very large electric motor, which turns the propeller. Okay, so again, think of your Toyota Prius, same idea. And the range of the submarine is determined by how much charge you can get on your battery, and how often you need to charge, and how fast you're going on your battery. This is part of the reason why they're so quiet, is because they run on electric motors when they're underwater. And they have to use the internal combustion engine to charge the batteries, which means they have to go up just below the surface. They have to stick a snorkel up, which allows them to draw in fresh air and blow out exhaust. And that's how they charge the batteries. And then depending on the cycle of the submarine, how fast they're going or not going, how long it's been since their last charge, a whole bunch of other factors, they may need to charge, every 12 to 24 hours, or they may be able to go a few days on a charge. Now, there is a new, well, it's not that new, but there is an evolutionary technology that is relevant to the conversation for Canada, and it is what's called air independent propulsion. So basically, if you can think of a way to generate electricity in a submerged state. So you're either using some sort of combustion material that doesn't require air or oxygen. Well, it may require oxygen, but it's fueled different. They use different types of fuels, and there's different types of systems. And what they do is they allow the battery level to be maintained for longer periods of time without having to go up and use the large noisy generators. And this is called AIP, or air independent propulsion. So with that as some background, so now the conversation is, okay, so where do the boats have to operate? Well, they have to operate in the North Atlantic, the North Pacific, and in the Arctic. Okay, so that's a pretty challenging set of operating environments for any submarine. We tend to use U.S. weapon systems because of systems commonality and training and a whole bunch of other things, which is fine and it's good and it makes a lot of sense. But some of the smaller submarines may or may not be able to accommodate some of the weapon systems or sensors that we would want to have in Canada. So in terms of a list, it's going to have a fairly good range. We're talking thousands of miles submerged. It's going to have all the weapons and sensors that make it useful as a submarine. Otherwise, why bother? Crewing will be an issue. Ideally, the fewer the people you need to operate the submarine, the better, because if you don't have a lot of people, and that allows you to potentially operate more people. So, if you've got half the crew, what you currently have, then in theory, you should be able to operate twice this number of submarines. So that's going to be a factor. We're probably looking at around somewhere in the 35 to 50 range for a crew. Probably looking in the order of around, I would say in the order of 2,000 to 3,000 tons, which may not mean much to your listeners, but that's roughly the size of what we have now, maybe a little bit bigger. And that would make sense, especially if it allowed you to have better endurance fuel. The issues specific to Canada, is it going to be capable of operating under the ice, or near the ice, or how far under the ice? And by how far, I don't mean how deep. What I really mean is how many miles and or hours and or days would it be prudent for the submarine to be able to sail under the ice? Would we imagine a submarine that would be capable of basically sailing under the Arctic ice pack from one side to the other? Well, this starts to become a significant engineering challenge, especially when you're dealing with a non-nuclear or conventionally powered submarine. Arguably, it's probably a bridge too far. But if you want to be able to patrol areas on the edge of the ice or on the fringe of the under ice, then the question is, how long do you want to be able to operate under there? And these are the kinds of questions that have to be answered in the early stages of this program. It is a very simplistic and insufficient argument to say, well, we need submarines because we have submarines, or we need submarines because, somebody tells us we need submarines. No, we need submarines because we're surrounded on three sides by water, and we have the need to A, know what's going on in our own water space, and B, we may need at some point to control that water space. And by controlling that water space, I mean denying access to it for people that we don't want using our water or access to our water. and I don't mean freshwater, I'm talking, our maritime approaches. Now, that's going to drive a whole bunch of requirements, technical requirements, how big it is, how far it can go, how fast it can go, how long it can operate on the ice, what kind of weapons it has, what kind of sensors it has, how many people it has, all these kinds of things. And those are interesting, but those aren't the real issue. So that this isn't about having to build a submarine because we're worried about what's going on in the South China Sea. We should be worried about what's going on in the South China Sea, and any submarine that we would want to build or purchase needs to be capable of operating in that environment. But if you can make it do all the things that we've talked about for the last hour, then it can go across the Pacific, and it can make a legitimate and significant contribution to any potential alliance or coalition activity that, God forbid, may be required in the coming decade or so.
And that brings us to the end of our two-part series on Canada's submarine fleet renewal. Thanks for joining us. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you can never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a review or send us an email at josh@cdainstitute.ca. You can also reach us on social media. Your feedback helps us bring you content that's relevant and engaging. For more in-depth analysis and updates on national security and defense, be sure to visit our website at www.cdainstitute.ca, where you can find articles, reports, and more. Thanks again for listening, and a big thank you to our guests, Mr. Mark Norman, Bob Davidson, and Luc Cassivi, for providing their expertise. Until next time.